Disclaimer: what you are about to watch is not good tactics so much as it is me saving myself into bad situations, then leaning on the RNG to bail me out. I take no responsibility for any headaches incurred by attempting to follow along with my strategies in this map. So let's get started. I learned 3 things in the process of doing this chapter, and the first one is right here. I accidentally figured out that pressing left or right in these menu screens jumps you directly to one of the events in it, which is a massive shortcut, and I absolutely love it, and I'm going to be using that for all of my preps from now on. Now, I've made room in my party to hire Sylvis and Derek. This is obviously because they have happiness requirements that I need to meet. Unfortunately, neither of them is going to be actually deployed in this map, but, you know, that happens. Sylvis and Faye both have little events now that are required for their permanent recruitment later on. Sylvis's one in particular can only take place here, so she can't be permanently recruited before this, but Faye's just means that she has 6 happiness. So that can happen anytime you manage to reach that milestone. Now I just need to do a little bit of item reorganization because once again I have managed to get a large number of weapons on units that cannot use them. So I'm going to continue to overload Sylvis by passing off the Gastrophetes crossbow to her, since Christine is unable to use it at this point, and Ruby is at long last getting an actually good sword on her. I have not been using swords nearly enough, and so her rank in that has fallen behind almost as much as small shields, so we're going to try and change that on this map just a little bit. Chapter 5 has pretty much inverted the pattern that I was noticing with long main missions and short side quests, because the main mission in the last video was very short, not so much in real time, because each turn was very long, but it was only 3 turns, and this side quest is going to be extremely long. So, pattern broken, I guess. The reason why this map takes so long is that we have to escort some green units to the escape point and then escape ourselves. To that end, I am deploying both of my thieves, because the green units are behind a door, and I need to unlock that. Now, there is a droppable door key on one of the bosses, but defeating that boss quickly is extremely difficult, and so it's better to have a thief to do it. And the reason why I need the second thief is that up in the northern end of this map, there is a treasure chest that I've decided I want to get. Now, this does mean that I have to deal with 3 pretty crappy units, because the thieves are not good at combat, and neither is Adel, who is unfortunately force deployed. He has not gained any levels, really, since we started, so he's still the same as he was back in Chapter 1, except he is unmounted, and Vantage is not going to make up for that enough, so Adel is really mostly a liability throughout this map. So my opening gambit for this map was to send Ruby forward as far as possible with her new longsword equipped. This is so that she gets attacked by both of the first enemies, which means that she gets as many opportunities as possible to either hit them with her sword or get hit by them to raise her shield rank. This then allows me to fall upon those 2 and get rid of them with all of my combat units. As you'll notice, I am still deploying the same old faces because I need experience and or kills on them, and this map is actually going to be pretty lucrative in that regard due to its length. The next big obstacle is an outlaw who is sitting in the middle of the cave, and he is using Overwatch. I am sending Ruby in there to disable it, because this guy has a swift bow, and that means that Ruby gets 2 opportunities to gain small shield experience from this round of combat, which I will take any day. This guy and another outlaw are kind of challenging to get Thaddy past in a short order. Now, Faye is baiting down a pickpocket from through what appeared to be solid wall, but is in fact a tunnel of some sort, and she and Kramer are able to deal with him pretty easily. This is the path that Zine needs to take to get to the treasure chest. And with this pickpocket dead, there are no enemies left for Zine to worry about, because the enemy guarding the other end does not move to attack, and so we'll be able to deal with him later in the map at our leisure. At the start of turn 3, we need to be pretty aggressive in dealing with these enemies, who will pose significant obstacles to Thaddy. Fortunately for us, Thaddy is 6 spaces away from the door at this point, and that means that he doesn't need to use his full movement on this turn in order to reach it on the next turn. Annoyingly, the Outlaw has put his Overwatch up again, which wouldn't be a problem if Ruby would just hit, but as it stands we're going to have to disable that again before we move Thaddy in. Overwatch is actually the second thing I learned something about through this map. If you move into someone's Overwatch range in a space that is already occupied and you get hit and have your turn interrupted, you actually get bounced back to an open space along your movement path. This happened to me with Faye at one point in testing. She got sent right back to where she started her movement after getting hit by this guy. It was pretty annoying and kind of funny too. It's now time for Volo to move in against the other Outlaw, and in so doing he is also going to bait over the 2 Corsairs who are flanking the bosses. The bosses themselves thankfully do not move at this stage. The reason the second Outlaw has to die really soon is that he has sleep arrows, and I can't afford to have this guy target Thaddy with them. I have the smelling salts on Ruby as a backup option just in case, but it's much better to just kill this guy and be done with it. Obviously that's not happening on this turn, but Volo did manage to 1-round KO one of the Corsairs thanks to an Adept proc, so that's pretty nice. Adel is going to move in against the Overwatch guy and miss. He unfortunately makes a habit of doing this throughout this map, but I don't often have to rely on him, so it works out alright in the end. Now, the big question of low turn counting this map is when to open the door in order to let the green units start moving. Because if you try and do it at the start of turn 4, the green units will all get to start moving, which could theoretically get us to the end 1 turn faster. But this also leaves Thaddy in range of the sleep arrow guy and both of the bosses. And Thaddy is not really designed to survive all of that, especially since the main boss has a plus weapon, and if you'll recall, being asleep means that the enemies always have 100 listed hit against you. So I'm delaying a bit, and that means that 2 of the green units are going to have already ended their turns by the time Thaddy opens the door. However, this also means that I've had time to kill the sleep arrow enemy, and that both of the bosses have ended their turns, so the green units and Thaddy are going to be safe for now. The rest of my unit's objective is to get close enough in to corral the remaining 3 enemies into the corner and hopefully prevent them from attacking the green units as they move past. This doesn't work out all that well. This is the first situation that I saved myself into, which isn't particularly ideal, and I did come to regret this pretty quickly. Zine is not opening the chest right now. She doesn't need to for several more turns, and there is a reason that I definitely don't want her to do it this early. For now, let's move on to my horrifically unreliable turn 5, which is essentially a mad scramble to both keep the boss area contained, while also moving up to combat the reinforcements that spawned the moment Thaddy opened the door. Faye has moved in to attack the main boss, whose name I believe is Zyeth. She actually inflicts a weird status on him. He goes all red and flashy. I hadn't noticed this before, but I believe this means that he is going to always target the last unit who damaged him while in this state, so Faye ends up getting 2 rounds of combat against him, and in the process she actually manages to injure him. And yes, that does mean that what you probably think is coming, but we'll get to that in a moment. Kramer moves in to attack the sub-boss and block them off from getting into the green unit's zone. Fortunately, despite missing his attacks, he manages to dodge the first one. He does not manage to dodge the second attack, which isn't great, but we deal with that. And then Volo is going to deathmatch the generic into oblivion. From this position, he can move where he needs to on the next turn, and despite the fact that he gets whacked, creating another problem, this is a very important thing for him to be doing. We don't want him to be deathmatching either of the bosses though, because they give more experience points, and so we want them to go to our training projects. My remaining units, Adel and Ruby, gang up on Zyeth and knock him down, and Ruby's attack with her longsword manages to put him at exactly 1 HP, and as a result he ends up crippled. So that just happened. It's an absolute miracle, and he will be being captured at the start of the next turn, which just leaves one more enemy for us to deal with down here. Thaddy doesn't need experience, so he is just taking evasive maneuvers to stay away from the people who can one-shot him. And meanwhile, Dean is moving up and equipping his zero range, as well as healing, because he is going to be supporting Volo in the fight to break through the reinforcement mob. Now, Kramer is going to take the capture here because he's at pretty low HP, so he doesn't want to see any dangerous combat, but also because his inventory is pretty empty, so he has room for it. And from that, he gets a level up to level 6, so he's doing very well so far. Now, Nima is weird. I keep thinking that he's a girl because his name ends with an A, but his portrait seems very masculine, so I think he's actually meant to be a guy. It's kind of weird. Volo is moving up again because he is the only unit who has a realistic chance of survival against the enemy who's been spamming Battle Cry, because he has high avoid. And he's also pretty good at taking out the other enemies, though less so without his Shamshir, which I don't want to equip because of the risk of it breaking. Dean manages to get whacked by one of these enemies, but thankfully he procs Vengeful and does a huge amount of damage, so I will forgive him for that, and that means I can feed that kill to someone else. And meanwhile, Faye finally finishes off Nima. Now, Nima is kind of a pain to deal with because he hits hard and he has the parry skill, which can sometimes just completely negate our attacks, but Faye manages to pull off an adept and a critical to get around the parry, and for that I greatly appreciate her. So now, the green units do move fairly erratically throughout this chapter. It seems a lot of the time they're trying to move around a blockage preemptively that they can see coming but aren't quite at yet. And that would be annoying if I was trying to get an 11 turn of this map by opening the door at the start of turn 4. Because in that case they would all need to use pretty much all of their movement every turn. But this particular clear is significantly more relaxed. Obviously, it would have been a real pain in the ass, as I mentioned before, to have them moving through the boss area while the bosses were still alive. So this is another reason why that particular clear would be extremely painful to actually try and attempt. At this point, Zine finally opens her chest, and that means that a new set of reinforcements is going to spawn in. In fact, I could have delayed doing this for another turn or two and we would still have been fine, but at this point I desperately did not want to have to reset over the good luck that I have had. So I do it here and I end up dealing with the consequences. Adel talks to Lumiere for a little special event. I don't know if this has any actual long-term effect, but I did it anyway. But now we probably want to talk about the reinforcements that just spawned. One of these guys is a sub-boss named Krishna, and he is a bounty target, so it would be good if we could kill or capture him, but realistically in an LTC context that's just not going to happen, and instead we just want to outrun him. because he is very capable of one-hit KOing quite a lot of my units at this point, including some who aren't even damaged, and heaven help us if he reaches the green units. Part of why he's so scary is that he has a huge attack speed, so he's likely to get a retry attack if I fail to hit him on my counterattack, and also he has the adept skill to just randomly get an extra attack and murder me. So he is scary, we want to stay well away from him. I briefly considered using Zine to try and bait him and his group upwards to give the rest of my units more time, but I decided not to in the end. At the other end of the map, Volo is deleting the last obstacle between the green units and the boat with Deathmatch, which is a relief, and Dean is not able to do this duty because he needs to go over and break through an enemy to let Zine out. Fortunately for us, he is very capable of simply one-hit KOing this guy, which he absolutely does, despite what you may think you're seeing on your screen, because Dean, missing with Desperation active, when has that ever happened? That's not a thing, right? Anyway, as it turns out, this works out okay because Zine had an extra turn or two to get to the escape point, but the positioning requirements here make my subsequent turns much more difficult than they needed to be. Kramer whips out a vulnerary here because at this point Krishna and his group are close enough that I've realized I am going to need to fight them in order to keep the green units alive. So he's going to heal up. Ruby is also going to heal up. Unfortunately, she only has a concoction on her, but at this point I had to use it, so goodbye concoction, I'll miss you. And then we also kind of need Faye to be healed up, but unfortunately Faye already used her vulnerary, so she is going to be stuck at low HP and is going to be almost a liability, relying solely on dodging to live. Dean actually manages to hit the pickpocket this time, and that means that Zine's way is free to move out towards the escape point. And then Krishna is going to move in against us, and he targets Ruby and gives her a big whack. Thankfully she survives, but unfortunately he manages to cripple her, which is just marvelous. So she needs to get the hell out of there. There's no way that any of these units won't kill her in one hit at this point. The thing about crippling that I discovered, the third thing I learned on this map, is that after a crippled unit moves, even if they manage to get their entire movement, they cannot back out of their action. They are forced to act on the space that they reach, which is pretty interesting. And I make sure to have my units move in such a way as to boost Ruby's movement, preventing her from stopping in those specific spaces. Unfortunately, all of this has left some of my green units exposed to Krishna's gang, and that's just stressful. Lumiere manages to pull out a dodge at this point, which is pretty important, as it turns out. Now, all of the green units are game over conditions on this map, so if even one of them had gotten killed at this point, I would have had to restart back from turn 5 and gone through the hell of all of that RNG spam again. And that would also have meant I would probably have missed out on the capture of Zyath, so I was desperately praying that I wouldn't screw this one up, and that the RNG also wouldn't screw me up. Now, I check Krishna's attack speed here. This is to determine whether it's safe to leave Adel in his range, but Krishna's attack speed is really high, so it is not safe, and Adel and his 4 hit points need to run away just as much as Ruby does. Now, Lumiere gets whacked by one of the enemies, who manages to slip through my lines and reach her, but fortunately she survives the hit, so that's something. And that leaves this guy in range for Faye to sunder him. Sunder can only be used if you haven't moved, so it's nice that that guy presented himself, but unfortunately Faye manages to fail to get 37% critical hits in a row. So instead of her getting the kill, she breaks her cutlass, and Kramer is going to have to move in and take that instead. So Kramer adds another kill to his experience pool for this map. He has done extremely well. And so here I am in yet another really awkward position, saving on turn 10. Luckily for me, there's not much left. The first thing to note is that Krishna can reach Ruby, and so I need to block his path, and for that I need to move Dean down. I have Dean grab Volo's Vulnerary and use it to prevent him from being one-shot, but that still leaves both Zine and Volo who are vulnerable to being killed instantly by Krishna from where they are. And Krishna chooses to go for Volo here, but Volo actually dodges and manages to get an Adept proc, which leaves Krishna on extremely low HP. And so I am able to have Kramer step up to him and just kill him. In an LTC, I managed to kill Krishna, and that means that we're getting a bounty on his head at the start of the next map, which is excellent. Krishna's death also means that I can afford to leave a line of extremely durable units between the remaining enemies and my squishies, so the rest of this map is extremely reliable, thanks to not having to deal with Krishna and his RNG and follow-up and one-hit KO shenanigans. I'm making use of Zine, Thaddy, and Adel to line Ruby's path so she gets her full movement on this turn, and she's going to end up directly adjacent to where the escape point will appear. Because a crippled unit will always move at least one space and still gets their action after that movement regardless of whether they were interrupted or not, this means that Ruby is going to be able to escape with everyone else on the subsequent turn once the escape point has appeared. Because the escape point does not appear until all of the green units have already used it, it is impossible with my current setup to complete this map on the same turn that the last green unit escapes. It is possible to complete this chapter in 11 turns with the door opening time that I did in this run, but it requires that we deploy Owen and that one of the green units move second after exactly one of our blue units in the turn order. At the start of this chapter, I wasn't sure that this was going to happen, so I didn't know that it could until I saw the turn order in this run. And at this point in this clear, can you really blame me for not wanting to go back and override all the funny RNG I got in this clear? Anyway, most of my units have made their way off the map, and there's just enough space for Kramer to pick up one final kill against a low hit point enemy that can attack him if I escape with other units first. This is going to end up giving Kramer a truly spectacular level up, so I'm very glad that this ended up being possible. And that is pretty much it. The remaining enemy has his turn right at the end of the action order, and so everything's done. All I have to do is walk off the map with Dean and Kramer in order to complete the chapter in 12 turns. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.